If your first thought after seeing John Carpenter's Halloween was, this is good, but it needs to be in space, then boy do I have a franchise for you.
The original Alien was released in 1979, kickstarting one of the most famous horror franchises of all time, as well as introducing us to one of the most iconic members of the horror pantheon, the Xenomorph. The series has gone through various phases, been rebooted multiple times, had zany crossover movies, and spawned some actually decent video games, and yet, despite its monumental cultural impact, the Alien series is on the shorter side when it comes to major horror franchises. With only 7 movies, 4 belonging to the original series and 3 being 21st century prequels that have a tenuous connection to the original story, it's clear that the Alien movies are a more significant occasion than the tired, repetitive entries of their longer genre counterparts. And yet, despite taking a long time between each film, this franchise has struggled ever since the third entry. The first 2 were considered classics of the sci-fi, horror, and action genres, but the various attempts over almost 40 years since then have never quite reached the same glory. Or who knows, maybe Alien Romulus was secretly a masterpiece. I'm writing this before it came out. I've talked about this franchise multiple times in years past, but now I'd like to give the first 4 films in the original series another look with all of the improvements I've made in my videos since 2021.
So without further ado, let's take a look at Ridley Scott's 1979 space slasher classic, Alien.
What a succinct and brilliant title. Alien. It emanates a strange vibe, not telling you anything more than you need to know. This vague, intentionally simplistic name, combined with the ominous, iconic poster of a peculiar green substance glowing from within what looks like an egg, just captures your attention and draws you in, preying on your curiosity. In 1978, John Carpenter's Halloween completely changed the world of horror by taking the ingredients for a successful slasher put in place by early trailblazers like Psycho or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and using them to cook up some amazing scares. This incited a new subgenre that would go on to dominate the horror space for most of the next decade, and so it doesn't necessarily come as a surprise that Alien, released only a year later, would share some DNA with Michael Myers' first outing.
Obviously, it's not the exact same, as this movie was also influenced by classic sci-fi movies like Star Wars or 2001: A Space Odyssey, but at many points the horror really shines through, and in many ways, it feels like Halloween in space.
One glaring similarity is the pacing, which is deliberately slow at first to build suspense. This is an important setup for most horror movies, but Alien really takes it to another level. Not much transpires at all within the first hour of the film, which can feel boring, but once you get past that point, the payoff makes it all totally worth it, and the film's a lot stronger in the long run due to it. For example, the opening functions as a good indicator of what the movie will be like. Nothing bombastic, no rousing music, just the distant, mysterious sounds of space, a slowly materializing futuristic title card, and the overwhelming feeling of isolation. Space, in and of itself, seems like a no-brainer setting for horror movies if you ask me. The strongest fear is that of the unknown, and as a totally new, unexplored frontier that is wholly separated from the comforts of society, space plays into that brilliantly. The tagline of this movie was actually, "In space, no one can hear you scream," taking the idea of being stranded in a backwater area of Texas or trapped in an old dark house and giving it a brand new spin. We spent almost the whole movie on this ship known as the Nostromo, seeing the journey of its crew after receiving a strange transmission from a seemingly empty, desolate moon. And though being on just one ship could feasibly get boring, the coloration and set design of every single area is so brilliant that it remains fresh throughout.
This is one of the best looking movies of the entire 70s, and a lot of that is owed to the amazing visionary visual designer H.R. Geiger, who was instrumental in the creation of this franchise's iconic antagonist.
The characters on the ship are immediately personable, and as we're drawn into an average conversation with them, we see how they behave like your average blue-collar worker, rather than the untouchable geniuses that other works of science fiction make space travelers out to be. This is a future in which space travel has been, to some extent, commercialized and turned into a more normal career. This is strengthened by the naturalistic dialogue and very serious tone which succeeds in getting us invested in all these characters. Ellen Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver, is the protagonist of this film and the entire franchise's original run as well, much like Laurie Strode in the original Halloween films, but it isn't immediately obvious in the original Alien, which I kind of admire.
The characters in Alien are not the best I've ever seen or anything, but they do feel like great slasher movie characters that we can get invested in, mainly because they don't do anything absolutely stupid, and they feel like real down-to-earth people, even though they're actually up from Earth.
It takes about 45 minutes to set everything up until they eventually land on the moon and begin exploring. This is where the movie gets a lot more interesting, mainly due once again to the set design, in addition to the obfuscating lighting and eerie pacing that keeps you on your toes as they survey the area. Eventually, it climaxes when they come upon a cave full of eggs, and then this happens.
God, yeah. After waiting all of that time with nothing going on, such a startling, amazing jump scare stands out way more than it would have in a more fast-paced movie.
The alien's first form, the face hugger, attaches itself to this guy, and after seeing its truly horrifying biological traits, such as acidic blood and a reflex that chokes its host if anyone tries to remove it, it suddenly dies and leaves him alone. This strange change of pace gives us initial relief, but eventually leads to another one of the most iconic scenes from the whole movie, when a terrifying little alien bursts out of the guy's chest, brutally killing him among all of his colleagues. Not only do these scenes shock and terrify us, but they keep us guessing due to how the alien is constantly changing forms. We don't know what this thing truly is, nor what it could turn into, and the amazing practical effects really bring the terrifying creature to life through all its transformations. Beyond the horror and visuals, though, the events uncover a deeper and more thematically intricate plot surrounding the conflict between Ripley's desire to immediately take down the threat at all costs and her employer's desire to make use of the organism.
And this is the central conflict of the entire franchise, because as you see, the real villain of the Alien movies isn't the xenomorph, but rather the company Weyland-Yutani, who wants to use the alien as a device, as a weapon of mass destruction, no matter the cost to human life. And as a result, the movie has amazing messaging about the impact of the profit motive and excessive advancement at any cost, ironically coming out 1 year before the corporate takeover of America.
This ideological battle is represented by two characters, Ripley and Ash, who have a truly compelling series of arguments and tense conflicts throughout the movie, further drawing us into the deeper story.
It happens, my dear, because that's what the company wants to happen.
The next major scene is one that I always found so stylistically interesting. This guy Brett enters the loading area to find his cat, but is eventually murdered by the fully grown xenomorph. It's probably the kill that most resembles Halloween and other slashers, but due to the ominous imagery of those swinging chains and the unforgettable introduction of the alien's final form, it's absolutely outstanding. You see, this movie may start out slow, but its second half never lets up, moving us from one amazing sequence to the next, similar to how the first Halloween had Michael's killing streak really take off by the end. The captain of this now traumatized crew eventually enters the ship's vents with a flamethrower in a desperate attempt to kill the beast, and this might be the highlight of the entire film. The tension and suspense are palpable throughout, eventually culminating in one of the most pulse-pounding climaxes in all of horror. The darkness, the ominous sounds of the radar beeping, the cries of his crewmates, everything is simply perfect.
But what sets this movie apart is, again, its ability to, in many ways, impress on a much deeper level than a lot of more contemporary horror films. I've covered a lot of great movies in this genre that have deep storytelling, but honestly, Alien is near the top of the pile.
An underrated moment is when Ripley communicates with the company's directive through a computer and is met with an absolutely harrowing message. Crew expendable. They were sent there to die, and this realization is possibly scarier than anything with the actual alien, as it demonstrates a more existential horror surrounding the devaluation of human life due to greed. This pairs well with the twist reveal that Ash is actually an android sent by the company to ensure its goals come to fruition. His fight with Ripley is an intense and brutal one that works really well to reinforce the impact of this film's themes. After the somewhat awkward but still effective deaths of the remaining crew members, we're left with Ripley as our final girl, and what a finale it is. This tense race to the escape pod during a self-destruct sequence honestly reminds me of the ending of a Metroid game, and I love it. The color is used here to great effect to obfuscate the alien's figure and add to the tension, and after her apparent escape, the reveal of the alien stashed into a compartment in the pod sends us into a surprise extended ending. This final showdown doesn't disappoint, forcing us into an even more claustrophobic space and granting us a spectacular, satisfying death for this unbeatable foe in which it's ejected into the darkness of space, ending the movie perfectly. With its showstopper visual design and cinematography, well-written characters, great suspenseful and scary scenes, unique world-building, exciting finale, and impactful themes that are shown off compellingly, Alien is definitely the classic sci-fi and horror masterpiece that everyone says it is. It's an easy 5 out of 5 for this legendary film. I guess slashers in space can work after all.
Indeed, Alien is a fantastic movie in so many aspects, but there's just one thing that always stuck out and kind of bothered me. You see, near the end of the movie, Ripley takes off her uniform and strips down to just a tank top and underwear. The only problem with it is that the underwear is the smallest I have ever seen. I mean, look at this. It's absurdly small. It's almost like she lost a bet while on set filming and had to wear that as a punishment. I mean, it's ridiculous and so distracting in a movie that's otherwise so serious. But who knows, maybe that's just the modern fashion trend. Anyway, 7 years after the original, a sequel titled Aliens was released with James Cameron helming the project. Now today, he's probably best known for his very weird and experimental take on the Blue Man Group, but back then he was hot off the success of his classic, The Terminator.
Often considered one of, if not the greatest movie sequel of all time, Aliens often overshadows its predecessor, despite both being held in high regard. But due to its prioritization of action over horror, I was initially skeptical about it. Don't get me wrong, I love action movies too, but horror is my bread and butter, so when I heard that this one pivoted away from the great scary vibe of the first Alien, I didn't expect to like it as much. But what did I end up thinking about it?
Well, let's just say it was a better sci-fi movie experience than Leprechaun 4 in space.
The movie starts off with Ripley being retrieved from her escape pod in an incredibly atmospheric opener, then being brought over to a space station and told of how she's been adrift in space for 5 decades. There's already a lot to love here, from the fantastic visuals to the less isolated, more positive tone that offers some needed clarity. However, I do also have an early point of contention, which is this scene of Ripley freaking out after being told how long she's been in space. This is very awkward, mainly due to the excessive slow-mo, not to mention that it turns out to be a dream, so it's kinda pointless. Oh well, that's just a minor nitpick, because we soon move into a witty, extremely well-written dialogue scene in which Ripley argues against the board members of the company Weyland-Yutani, trying to reason with them and shooting out some hilarious remarks while she's at it.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
They make her out to be a compelling protagonist and absolute badass right off the bat, and when she's informed about the colonization of the moon upon which they found the original xenomorph, and of families now living on it, seeing her quickly proven right about the danger at hand is pretty satisfying. It reminds me a lot of that one scene in Halloween 4 where Loomis gets proven right about Michael Myers, and it does wonders to make us adore the character of Ripley even more than we already did. However, at the same time, it does seem kind of contrived that there have been colonists on this planet for 20 years, and they only just now have a problem right after Ripley shows up. It's a bit too convenient, if you ask me. This movie immediately showcases a lighter tone once we're introduced to the new main group of characters known as the Colonial Marines. They're all memorable in their own right, from the macho Vasquez to the hilarious Hudson, played perfectly by a goofy and charismatic Bill Paxton. In fact, that's one of this movie's greatest strengths. I like the characters in Alien, but I love the characters in Aliens. They all flow together so well and feel like an actual team that we can root for, rather than a bunch of actors awkwardly trying to work together. I especially love Lance Henriksen as the down-to-earth bishop, an android who challenges Ripley and her past experience with Ash. By the end, he shows her the good side of androids and, why they're better than frickin' iPhones. The Marines come off as playful and somewhat cocky, which can be annoying, but Ripley's commanding, serious nature quickly whips them into shape, and even though this film also takes its time in setting things up and is 20 minutes longer than the last movie, it's far more entertaining due to the colorful cast of characters and memorable, often hilarious dialogue. Once they actually get to the planet, their exploration of abandoned outposts is a suspenseful sequence with the ominous, minimalistic music and grainy, innovative body cam shots enhancing the creepy vibe. Eventually, they stumble upon a little girl who's been hiding from the aliens named Newt, and she's also a fantastic character. Like, seriously, her actress does a phenomenal job for her age, not ever being annoying like a lot of child characters are, but also being funny, likable, and really easy to care about. Her relationship with Ripley is the strongest link among all the character bonds here, but they're all pretty great in my opinion. Additionally, Newt's harrowing experience with the aliens shows on an even more disturbing level what impact these monsters can have and how truly relentless they are.
These people are here to protect you. They're soldiers.
It won't make any difference.
About an hour in, we get one of the most unforgettable action scenes I've ever watched, in which the Marines descend to this hellish combination of human architecture and the aliens' hauntingly beautiful nesting, eventually being attacked by a group of aliens and being wiped out brutally. The sense of urgency in this scene is so brilliant as the body cams create a limited connection between us and the Marines, making their deaths hit home while still being cryptic and disorienting due to a lack of full information.
It's a truly devastating series of events recapped brilliantly and succinctly by the resident philosopher of the group.
Hey, maybe you haven't been keeping up on current events, but we just got our asses kicked, pal.
In fact, that's another great asset of this movie. It's so quotable. The dialogue is just genius, going from something hilarious one moment to something horrifying or even very insightful. I guess you could say there's a little something for everyone.
Why don't we try that?
We better get back, because it'll be dark soon, and they mostly come at night. Mostly.
Eventually, the guy who originally got Ripley involved in this, Burke, reveals himself to be another greedy henchman of the company with some truly horrific plans. His various dialogues with Ripley are reminiscent of the ones with Ash from the last film, but I'd argue they're even better written and more impactful.
You know, Burke, I don't know which species is worse. You don't see them fucking each other over for a goddamn percentage.
And that right there might be the best line in this entire franchise.
And it's justified too, since Burke attempts to lock Ripley and Newt in a room with the facehugger so that one would become impregnated and he could use them to bring the alien back to the company. Man, what a son of a bitch. He just proves that this movie's characters are so outstanding even when you hate them. But it's the final half hour where Aliens ascends from an outstanding action film to a contender for, and I don't say this lightly, the greatest film of all time. It starts with this absolutely masterful, terrifying scene of the remaining characters sealing themselves in a room and trying to hide from the aliens, but eventually they see that their radar indicates the threat is still getting ever closer and look up to the horrifying sight of a whole group of them climbing through the vents of the room.
This is how you properly use suspense, and it's one of the finest horror scenes in any movie, despite Aliens being more action-oriented most of the time.
The ensuing chase scene through the vents makes use of spectacular lighting and intense action to keep the thrills coming, and the satisfying death of that bastard Burke just solidifies how outstanding this part of the film is. And though the aliens have been kept in the shadows for much of the movie, we get a full, terrifying, nightmare-inducing look at one when it rises from the water behind Newt. This scene scared the shit out of me when I first saw it, and it just demonstrates how truly out of this world the design of the xenomorph is in the first place. This then leads into the showstopper finale of Ripley descending into the alien nest, confronting their queen, who by the way is the best use of special effects maybe outside of The Thing, and destroying it in a blaze of glorious action. The lighting, music, and terrifying imagery of the xenomorphs lurking around every corner confront our protagonist, but she bravely keeps fighting, tearing it all down. And yet, somehow, this fantastic sequence is topped by the true final battle. You see, in a shocking and brutal reveal, the alien queen is shown to still be alive as she fucking tears Bishop to shreds, and then Ripley has to take her on in a giant mech that's set up early on in the movie. This is just an iconic ending to an iconic film, and if you need me to explain why this is awesome to you, then what the fuck is wrong with you?
Get away from her, you bitch!
In the end, Aliens somehow tops its predecessor. Despite its seemingly jarring tonal shift, it manages to pull off a completely new genre like it's no problem, with some of the best characters, writing, effects, and action in the history of cinema. It's a common opinion to fucking adore this movie, but you know what? Sometimes the masses are right. I may have had one or two small things at the very start that I didn't like, but you can ignore all of that shit because Aliens is a 5 out of 5 and one of my favorite movies ever. Period. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Aliens is mostly a masterpiece. Mostly.
It's interesting though, because I realized while I was watching these all again that the first time I watched the Alien franchise, I accidentally watched all the special editions, and this time I watched the theatrical version. So some scenes were missing, and one that really stuck out to me as not being there in the theatrical version of Aliens was a scene in which Ripley talked about her daughter and was informed of the fact that she had lived her whole life and already died in the time that Ripley was adrift in the escape pod in space. And instead, in the theatrical version of the movie, they don't mention her daughter at all, and she just has some more scenes playing with her cat. So I guess what I'm saying is that essentially via Ellen Ripley, we in the Nostromo are having our galaxy run by a childless cat lady who is miserable and wants to make us all miserable too. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some business to attend to.
Hey, baby. You know they call me Vladimir Futon for a reason.
Anyway, the next film in this franchise needs no introduction to longtime fans of my channel. The film in question is, of course, 1992's Alien 3 by David Fincher. I've made it clear that I'm not at all a fan of this movie, but I am going into this rewatch with an open mind, despite the fact that this was pretty much how I felt after my first viewing. Get away from this franchise, you Finch!
Alien 3 begins with Ripley, Newt, and Hicks from the last movie on their ship floating through space, and over the course of a very long 3-minute credits sequence, we're shown that there was secretly a facehugger egg on board.
Oh, come on! That's so cliche and... Sorry, I'll be quiet. Open mind. Continue.
And it ends up breaking through Newt and Hicks' sleeping chambers and killing them off screen.
Oh, that's it. Are you fucking kidding me? I wanted to give this movie a fair second chance, but it just throws out the biggest middle finger of an opening I've ever seen right off the bat.
These two characters were so well written, interesting, and would have been fantastic in a sequel alongside Ripley, especially due to how attached we get to them in the last movie. And I'm not just angry on a superficial level because I like these characters, but also because it really hampers the story. Killing them off screen so unceremoniously comes off as incredibly insulting, and the characters they replace them with are so ungodly awful that it's almost hard to comprehend why they would do this. I'm not innately opposed to killing off a major character in service of a more risky, unique story, but if you pull that type of stunt, then you need to make up for it with a plot that feels worthwhile and justifiably based on the death in question. This is a perfect example of how to fail at this completely, as the story makes almost no real use of these important character deaths, instead treating Newt and Hicks as annoying inconveniences that need to be eliminated so that the dipshit prison drama movie that they're so desperate to show us for some reason can finally begin.
Sorry, I really tried not to be so negative, but it's impossible, and it's not even just this moment, but the visuals of the movie overall that are immediately infuriating.
The green screen is noticeably bad, and it just gets worse throughout, and I do like some of the bleak imagery we're shown when Ripley first lands on the prison planet, but the entire rest of the film takes place within drab, ugly corridors and grimy rooms that are simply repulsive. The inventive, stunning visual design present in both human and alien structures from the last two movies is gone, replaced by the most revolting colors of the vomit rainbow. Gray, puke green, shit brown, and orange are pretty much the only colors in this entire movie, and it's just not interesting to look at.
The set design is boring, the costume design is laughable, and the CGI, as we'll talk about later, is an absolute train wreck.
Just like with the visuals, the dialogue and characters are extremely dull, with all of them blending together and being completely devoid of interesting personalities. It's just a bunch of bald British men ranging from idiotic clowns to degenerate rapists to eye-roll-inducing, comically angry prison officers. Even this doctor, who's given a lot of screen time in the first part of the movie, is boring as shit and extraordinarily unlikable. Like, this guy has negative charisma and just comes off as a posh asshole. You know, as opposed to all the other characters who are low-class assholes. It's clear that they try to replicate the more isolated and suspenseful pace of the first movie by moving us into an indoor maze-like location and reducing the threat to one alien again, but it just doesn't work on any level. We immediately know that there's an alien present before any of the other characters know what it's going to do, know what it looks like, and can predict its every move, removing the mystery that made the first film so unsettling and mystifying. The only change made here to breathe new life into the villain is having it burst out of a dog rather than a human, which causes it to take on a more dog-like form. Now, this is actually a very cool idea, but it barely amounts to anything and certainly doesn't make the aliens scary again. Alien 3 also tries to replicate the slow pace of the last two movies, but while those had stunning visuals, interesting characters, witty and intriguing dialogue, and lots of mystery and suspense during their build-ups, Alien 3 is just a boring slog with absolutely nothing going for it.
It looks like shit, the dialogue is shit, the characters are shit, its treatment of legacy characters is shit, the acting is shit, it's just all shit. Like, seriously, after watching this movie, I don't think I ever need to see another scene of British space prison guards discussing medical procedures ever again. Not that I wanted to before, not that anyone would want to see that, but you'll certainly get your fucking fill of it with this movie.
So Ripley shaves her head due to lice, G.I. Jane 2 can't wait to see it, and then we're treated to an incredibly pointless scene of her eating with the prisoners in the cafeteria and challenging them. You see, they all treat her strangely because she's a woman and they're, well, rapists and murderers, so we get this cringe-inducing part of her sitting down and trying to intimidate them. Honestly, I really don't know what the point is. The only information we get from this scene is that the prisoners are believers of God, which, like, okay, good for them. Why does that fucking matter? Seriously, this is all so useless, and it's all just padding in place of a real plot. The alien starts to kill people, but it just feels tired and cheap. Like, sure, some of the kills are okay average slasher movie kills, but they've lost all of the creativity and actual fear factor of the last two films. It's like comparing the first Halloween and Texas Chainsaw to the Winnie the Pooh horror movie. Eventually, Ripley starts out a very forced relationship with the Dr. Clemens, which comes out of absolutely nowhere. They have zero chemistry, and he gets killed very soon after, so once again, it's just completely inconsequential and pointless. And is it just me, or does every damn character in this movie, including Ripley, look the exact same?
Guys, I have it. The perfect new character for Alien 3.
And then somehow there's a scene worse than anything yet in this shit show where a group of prisoners jumps Ripley and one guy attempts to SA her, which, like, why the fuck does this need to be a scene in the movie?
I get that these are all a bunch of really bad guys and all, but all this does is make me hate them more, and due to the fact that Ripley gets saved anyway, it doesn't really have any purpose or impact on the broader story. I mean, I guess it makes this one prisoner named Dylan look like a better guy, but it's not like he ever does anything beyond the bare fucking minimum.
Dylan literally attacks Ripley and tells her that he's a horrible human being, and yet she ends up crying when he dies and getting equally upset as she did when Hicks and Newt died? What the fuck? Not to mention, why does the guy behind this vile act put on Riddick sunglasses and scream like he's tearing his shirt off at the RNC before he does it? And why the fuck does this music of all the music play over an attempted rape scene? This movie makes me feel like I'm losing my goddamn mind. It's clearly trying to be a drama film, but it's a terrible one due to the lack of interesting characters, memorable dialogue, or interesting character development. It doesn't work as an action movie because it's so boring, and it doesn't even work as a horror movie due to how cheap, predictable, and lame everything is. And even Ripley isn't interesting here, as all her personality has been muted and she's just a generic, static protagonist.
This is a maximum security prison. And you have no weapons of any kind?
Lines like these are obviously trying to replicate her badass dialogue from the last film, but it just comes off as the writers admitting that the entire premise of this movie is completely stupid. The pacing is also a nightmare, going from mundane dialogue to brutal kills within seconds and lacking any good build-up whatsoever. Even the twist that Ripley has a baby alien in her doesn't elicit any reaction out of me, because I don't care what happens to any of these characters, and it makes zero sense.
Walter, I have to tell you something. I'm pregnant with an alien. Whatever. What? You don't care? No, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, didn't the facehugger attach to the dog and birth the alien that you're fighting right now? Or are you telling me there was secretly a second egg and a second facehugger? Are you telling me that this is the Lee Harvey Oswald of the Alien franchise?
This shot, when the alien breaks into the infirmary, is very iconic and pretty fantastic, but I find it so frustrating that everyone forgets the one that comes right before it.
You see, that does not look like an alien. That looks like what you see when you take a few too many shrooms.
They also imply that Clemens may have tried to kill Ripley right before he gets killed? Like, what? Once again, it goes nowhere, comes out of nowhere, and makes nowhere near as much sense as, well, anything. The big finale of the movie sees the prisoners and Ripley take on the alien by running around and luring it into a molten lead mold. Not a terrible idea, but it means that these characters are sacrificing themselves for themselves. Like, their only reason for fighting is that they don't want to die as cowards, which doesn't give them any sort of redemption. Thus, it defeats the purpose of making a bunch of rapists your main characters. And what a fucking train wreck this finale is. Like, holy shit, it's bad. It's just these clownish and annoying prisoners being chased by the alien for way too long, the same shots getting repeated over and over, indistinguishable. I swear, whoever thought to have these alien POV shots should have been fired. It looks atrocious, makes my head hurt, and adds nothing to this scene other than more padding. Instead of an intense fight for survival or climactic battle, this is a boring, repetitive slog that contains some truly atrocious, embarrassing moments, like when Ripley has a sissy fight with the damn alien, or this absolutely incredible line delivery when members of the Weyland-Yutani Company arrive.
Where is Lieutenant Ripley? Is she still alive?
And what in God's name are they wearing here?
What do you mean? I thought we were all gonna cosplay as this.
Even the alien's death is extremely boring, has no real impact, and looks worse than Leprechaun's death in Leprechaun 4. Oh god, this means I have to talk about the CGI in the movie, don't I? Well, let me just say for starters that this might be the worst I've ever seen. Worse than Leprechaun 4, worse than The Phantom Menace, it's truly atrocious. And of course, yes, Leprechaun 4 might actually look worse at many points, but that movie had a budget of $1.5 million, whereas this hunk of shit cost $50 million. How? Where the fuck did that money even go? You can't look at this, and tell me it came from a movie with a budget above, like, one Taco Bell Crunchwrap. Like, come on, man, this shit is embarrassing. It looks like you held up a cardboard cutout of the alien with a popsicle stick and moved it along. And beyond that, the quote-unquote emotional ending of Ripley sacrificing herself and jumping into the lava so Weyland can't get the alien inside her also looks like dog shit. It would look better if they printed a photo of Sigourney Weaver and just threw it down. I think her dying at the end makes sense, but it definitely didn't make me feel anything because the whole movie Ripley didn't act like the Ripley we knew. She wasn't the interesting, likable, relatable, funny, strong, intelligent person we knew, just a shell of her former self, much like how this movie is nothing like the innovative, clever, entertaining, iconic, and riveting masterpieces that came before it, instead being a complete insult to the art of film. This shit is so unbelievably bad, it was somehow worse than I remembered, and I can say with absolute certainty that Alien 3 is my least favorite movie of all time. It has no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and so I proudly give it a certified 0 out of 5. Congratulations, Fox, you managed to completely fuck over this franchise, and to think that the original plot had the aliens coming to Earth and wreaking havoc. How good we could have had it.
And speaking of falling, this movie is so damn bad it makes me just want to give up and end it all. So, I'm sorry guys, but I think it's time I sacrifice myself. Ugh. God damn it. It didn't work.
Our journey today ends with the 1997 sequel to Alien 3, Alien Resurrection. Written by Joss Whedon, this film is often called the absolute worst in the series and reviled by critics.
Really? Worse than Alien 3? Is that even possible?
It did release only 5 years after the last movie, being the shortest gap between sequels in this entire franchise and making it and Alien 3 the only films in this series to release under the same president. Why does that matter? It doesn't, I just found it interesting. Immediately, the title sticks out as extremely stupid and cliche. Resurrection? Really? I mean, sure, that's what this franchise needed after the last fucking movie, but they couldn't pick anything better? Oh well, let's go in with an open mind and see if this is really as bad as Alien 3. Well, I can say that right off the bat, the special effects are leaps and bounds ahead of what they had in Alien 3, despite them again only being 5 years apart. Not because the CGI is that superior, but because it's used sparingly and there's a return to more practical effects, which mostly look fantastic. Mostly. However, in terms of the plot, they somehow managed to hit us with yet another completely moronic setup, though nowhere near as bad as the last movie. After all, how could it be? There are no more beloved characters left for them to kill and no legacy left to piss on. Instead, it's just glaringly stupid rather than deeply insulting, and I'll take that. You see, the company has somehow cloned Ripley after many years of failed attempts, and are using this clone to extract the alien that was inside of her in Alien 3. What? How the hell did they pull that off when she killed herself in a vat of lava? I mean, I'm sure they found her DNA somewhere, but where? That'd be good to know. Not to mention, how does cloning her immediately bring the alien back too? Maybe it being inside of her somehow changed her DNA, but, I mean, that's not how that works at all in real life. So it's extremely dumb and clearly a desperate attempt to bring back Sigourney Weaver, which is just a shame. As much as I like her, they should have moved on and made an original film in this universe instead, and then they'd avoid having this lethal dosage of contrivance as the premise for their movie. At the very least, the idea that the company would be that desperate is congruent with the rest of the series, and the effects when they extract the alien are fantastic, as are the visuals overall. They're nowhere near the first two movies, but this movie is fun to look at, and actually looks more in line with its budget. The characters in this movie are, just like the entire plot, very stupid and often unlikable, but at least Winona Ryder is a pretty good new interpretation of the android character, and the members of this ragtag crew that are this movie's version of the Marines are interesting and fun to watch, though I don't really find myself caring about them all too much. This movie is far more action-oriented than any of the others, and while Aliens was a finely crafted fusion of action and horror, Resurrection is more like your average cheap blockbuster action movie, though not without its fantastic highlights. I love this basketball scene, even though it's stupid and so out of place. I love this ridiculous part where a guy bounces a bullet off the ceiling to kill somebody, and I especially love this horrifying scene of people being held in a chamber and forcibly trapped with a facehugger. Don't get me wrong, there are tons of cringe-inducing parts too, like when Ripley tries to choke this guy or when she tries to rip this guy's tongue out, and it all comes off as extremely bizarre and unwarranted, but at least it's not a boring slog. Plus, this movie proves that while white men can't jump, white women certainly can. I mean, look at that dunk, holy shit! The film also doesn't do a ton to reinvent the wheel or add anything new to keep the aliens scary, but it at least does them justice by having them look good and having some suspenseful and creepy scenes later on. They go around slaughtering people, oftentimes by just stabbing them with their inner mouths, which gets very repetitive, but there are some standout moments, such as the guy getting ripped apart with frozen gas, or the chestburster slamming through a dude's head. It's once again very silly and almost comedic, but I was consistently entertained, and as the shortest of these movies as well, Resurrection is anything but mundane or uninteresting. Uh-oh, somebody's gonna need a big bandage on that ear. I will give this movie a ton of credit though, because it does contain an absolutely harrowing scene in which Ripley stumbles upon the various other failed attempts to clone her, including one horribly botched one that's still alive, and emotionally burns them all down with a flamethrower. It's a truly disturbing segment, and it's handled with the emotional gravitas that it deserves. Bravo. And then they ruin it by having her say this type of shit.
So, who do I have to fuck to get off this boat?
But the real standout scene here is the underwater chase, in which we see the aliens in a totally new environment, and yet they're just as terrifying here. This scene is fantastic, adding something new to the series and keeping it tense, fun, and creepy. It is unrealistic that the humans hold their breaths for so long though, and the next scene is absolutely atrocious, having a very lame fake-out death for Winona Ryder's character, and this embarrassing moment of the alien dodging bullets on a fucking ladder. Like, really? And the alien does look pretty bad here, so this scene probably should have just gotten cut, but it's immediately made up for by the great, more intelligent and contemplative dialogue between Ripley and the android, giving this otherwise dumb and juvenile movie a needed dose of introspection.
I should have known. No human being is that humane.
Eventually, Ripley ends up in the incredibly designed, nightmarish alien Queen's Nest, where she finds something very strange. You see, the final villain of this movie turns out not to be the Queen, but instead this disgusting alien-human hybrid creature that, personally, I think is absolutely terrible. I think it looks like it's covered in puke, I think it's a dumb idea to begin with, and I think the special effects when it's eventually killed by being sucked out of a crack in the window, yes, that's actually how they end this fucking movie, are horrendous. I mean, look at this, and then think of how this movie cost $70 million. That's completely inexcusable. It essentially turns this movie from ridiculous but funny to ridiculous and somewhat annoying, at least for me. But no matter how you slice it, this movie isn't that bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, it has some truly brain-dead plot moments and absolutely atrocious dialogue and characters at many points, but at the very least, it's entertaining and engaging. Alien 3 was an insulting and painful experience. Alien Resurrection is a silly, goofy, fun time. I won't claim that this is a good movie by any means, but is it better than Alien 3? You bet your damn egg sack it is. 2 out of 5. This movie is bad in all the right ways.
You know, I'm done with this battle. I can review this bastard of a movie time and time again, but the world has moved on, and no words of mine will change the public perception that Alien 3 isn't that bad. I guess I should move on too. You see this book? This book tells the original story that was going to be used for Alien 3, and it's honestly quite compelling. And from what I've heard, they're developing this Alien TV show that's also going to make use of a similar idea. So, you know, the future is looking bright for this franchise, and I'm just wallowing in the past. So, you know what? I am done with you, Alien 3. Are you sure about that? Are you sure that without anyone to remind society of how truly horrible I am, that all the edgy re-evaluators will slowly manipulate everyone into underestimating my concentration of crappiness? You know what, you bastard? You're right. What do you say? How about I smash you to pieces again, for all time's sake? Bring it on. was fun. But, I feel a strange sense of emptiness. I don't know, what am I even going to review next? Well, I've got an idea. You know what turns 50 this year? Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Thanks for reminding me.